Today's whisper reading, I will be the naughty baby of the Divine Mother. In the hall of life, decorated with mountains, stormy cataracts, and wild scenery, I have played long. Each time, when tired of play, I cried for thee. Thou didst drop down through the skylight of my heart's craving, some new doll of fame, friends, or prosperity to quiet me. This time, Divine Mother, I will play the naughty baby. I will sob unceasingly. No more shall the toys of earthly pleasures stop my cries. O Divine Mother, thou must come soon, or I will waken all creation with my cries. I will make all thy sleeping children wake and join me in a chorus of wails. Forsake thy busyness with the housework of thy creation. I demand attention. I demand thee. I no longer want thy playthings. So, desire is what I'd like to focus the talk on this morning. The Bhagavad Gita reading in today's reading. And Master said that desires are the most unrelenting enemies of man. He cannot appease them. And that our only desire should be to know God. But desire is so insidious. And as we discussed in the affirmation today, desire resides in the subconsciousness. So sometimes desires arise and we're not even sure where they came from, how long they've been there. But the more awareness we bring to them, the more we're able to work with them. Master told a really sweet story. When he first came to America, he and some of the monks would be invited to one of the devotees' homes for lunch occasionally. And the hostess served ginger ale. And after a few visits, Master realized that he had a taste for ginger ale. And one day before his visit, he realized that he had a little desire for ginger ale. And so he caught that little desire and realized that even that little innocuous thought of wanting the ginger ale is how we form attachments. And so he just decided from that day on that he would no longer drink ginger ale. So it's something for us to think about. In today's Gita reading, desire obscures even the wisdom of the wise. Their relentless foe, it is a flame never quenched. Desire deludes and eclipses the discrimination of embodied souls. So that's a really direct message for us, that desire eclipses our discrimination. And again, as I said, because desire comes from the subconscious mind, it can really come up and take control of our lives in different ways. Human desire is a thief that robs the Christ consciousness from us. An example of that in today's reading are spiritual teachers who, instead of doing and serving for God, they get into that desire to have their own fame or their own wealth or power. And those are the types of things that we have to be very watchful of on the spiritual path. True Christians are those who live in the Christ center and who keep their attention always on God. So regardless of what spiritual tradition you were born into or what spiritual tradition you practice, essentially by just keeping your mind on God, we are all true Christians. Christ means the anointed one. It's an honorific title for anyone who has been sent to earth by God to do God's work. Master said that God will give us whatever we desire, because that's the cosmic law. It's the law of creation. Whatever we put our attention on and we bring willpower to eventually has to come to us. But the problem with that is, as soon as one desire is fulfilled, 3 more spring up in its place. We'll never be content because the ego is incapable of contentment. So that's why it's so important for us to keep our awareness always at the front of the forehead, the spiritual eye. There's a little game at the carnival called Whack-A-Mole that I'm sure you've all seen, where this little mole comes up and you hit him with a little mallet and he goes down, but then 3 more pop up in his place. And that's pretty much what our desires are like. We just, we have one desire and it becomes fulfilled, and then all of a sudden there's many more attached to it, around it, and coming through. In the autobiography of a yogi, Lahiri Mahashaya had an interesting experience with Babaji Krishna on the night of his Kriya initiation. Hi, Colleen. Lahiri was initiated in a golden palace that Babaji manifested out of the ether. And when he asked his companion why this was so, he explained that in a different, very dim previous incarnation, Lahiri had had the wish or the desire to spend time or experience life in a palace. And Lahiri said that once he was in this situation, this beautiful otherworldly palace, he said that a deep satisfaction spread over my mind. A submerged desire hidden in my subconsciousness from lives now gone seemed simultaneously gratified and distinguished. So Yogananda talked about that a lot, that every desire we have to fulfill before we can completely merge into God. So it's something for us to think about. And again, using that little tiny desire for ginger ale, which is such a funny little thing, but if there's anything in our life, for most of us, for many of us, it's coffee. You know, a certain time in the afternoon, I do this at work myself, I crave or desire coffee. And then when you really start to look at it, I don't really even feel thirsty necessarily, but it is a way to get off, like to get out of my desk and take a walk and procrastinate. And, you know, that's not going to make or break us, but the more aware we become of all of these little things, the more powerful we become on our walk back to God. Ram Dass, many of you know, started the American counterculture in the late 60s, early 70s with the expression, be here now. And the interesting thing was that wasn't even his expression. It was his friend who he met in India who used to say that to him all the time. He would say, Ram Dass, be here now, because he was always fixated on his past and his desire of what he wanted from the future. And that's what desire does to us. It pulls us out of our center. It pulls us out of the here and now, and it brings us into the future or into the past, and nothing happens there. They don't exist. This very moment is where we should reside at all times if we can, but it takes so much work. So the reason why desire really inspired me this week in the reading was because I've been working with that myself this past month. We went to Martha's Vineyard for vacation, which we do every summer. And I have had a desire my whole adult life to own a home there. And I realized on this particular vacation during meditation, desire is so deeply rooted and so powerful that it was pulling me out of my center. And whenever I'm on the island, I kind of get into this like real estate consciousness and looking at real estate ads and wondering if in the future I might possibly be able to have enough money to buy a house. And I just realized like that is really, it takes your energy basically. It pulls your energy in a different direction. So I prayed and I offered it to God, and I just realized that instead I could just thank God for giving me the experience of being here now. Like, thank you for giving me this beautiful experience and this beautiful time of respite without that attachment to what might come in the future. So we all have desires, and they're different for all of us. You know, we all have hundreds of little desires that are buried in the subconsciousness for different things like foods we like or experiences we want to have. But we also can have these really deep-seated ones that have to do with wanting children or wanting a specific type of relationship or power, fame, money. There's so many. And it's important that when we have these, that we at least recognize them, you know, at the very least, become aware of them and try to name them. And then to work with the desire by kind of just going down and seeing if you can identify perhaps which part of the astral spine the desire lives in, because the desires are rooted. We have like knots in the chakras that tie us to the physical body, and these desires are those knots. So if it's a longing for a love relationship, you know, the feeling that you don't have that, perhaps it's in the heart. Or for a house, perhaps it's in the root chakra for security, or money can be that way too. And if you're not sure, it's okay, because many of them reside in many different energy centers. They're so insidious and they're so deeply rooted. And some come from previous lifetimes, and they come back. They just keep coming back lifetime after lifetime until in some way we either purify them and release them, or we actually have the desire satiated in some way. But the highest way to deal with desire is to offer it up to God, to offer it up to the spiritual eye. And the beauty of our practice in this practice, Kriya Yoga, is that we are given the tools to draw energy up the spine. So every time we practice Hong Sa or Kriya, we're actually bringing the Kundalini up and untying those knots of desire that hold us rooted in the material world and in this physical plane. So there's nothing more powerful than that. The way to, again, is through the Christ center. So keeping our consciousness always on the Christ center. Yogananda said that if we did nothing else in this incarnation, even if we didn't meditate, but we just tried to keep our awareness here, that we would be able to transform our consciousness into a higher consciousness just by that one simple act. Today's chant that Judy sang is so beautiful, and the words are so powerful. Desire, my great enemy, with his soldiers surrounding me. And it's such a beautiful vision, the soldiers of desire basically coming in to keep us away from God, you know? Giving me lots of trouble, but pranayam be thy religion. Pranayam is what will give us salvation. So again, the daily meditation practice of offering up to God whatever it is that we find standing in our way and keeping us separate. Because again, the ego consciousness, which is where desire comes from, keeps us separate from God. It's that simple. Ananda Ma told her disciples that if they desire fame or wealth, God will give it to them, but you'll not feel satisfied. And she said, the kingdom of consciousness is unity. And until we feel it in its totality, we will never be content. So the way to feel the unity of the universe is through the Christ consciousness, super conscious awareness, which again comes from the Agya chakra. The Christ consciousness, or the unity consciousness, is opposite of duality. And duality is ego consciousness. It's the consciousness that we're born into the physical body with. She also said to her devotees, controversy belongs to the spiritual path, but actually everyone is in his own home. So here we're speaking about our reading today that each of us is given the spiritual teacher that most deeply speaks to our own particular karmic blueprint, our temperament, and the things that we need to work on in this lifetime. So all of the great religions ultimately bring us through the same process of working our way up through the spine and offering up all desire and attachment in the furnace or altar of Christ consciousness at the point between the brows. Ma also said that spiritual seekers are each molded in a unique way, but each will have to pass through the gate of truth. This is the gate of truth. So all spiritual teachings talk about the gate of truth. In the Christian tradition, in the book of Revelation, we talk about the 7 seals and the 7 churches, and they're all talking about the energy centers in the astral spine and eventually bringing the energy up to Christ consciousness or Krishna consciousness. So we have that ability and that kingdom of God in our own brain. It's so powerful. And again, just by bringing the awareness, the medulla oblongata is the seat of ego consciousness, and that's where we live most of our life. But in our daily meditation practice, we lift that consciousness through the brain to the Agya chakra. And it's in those moments that we can experience super consciousness. Now, it doesn't happen automatically. It's a lifelong practice, but we can have those moments. And the more that we keep our awareness at the Agya chakra, the front part of the brain, the more likely we are to be in a witnessing type of consciousness when things happen in the world around us. So the witness consciousness is a super conscious type of awareness that we can use to basically look at our own desires and then work with them in a very powerful way to release them. I want to tell a little story about witness consciousness. When we were at the beach last week on the vineyard, there was a family sitting about 10 feet away from us, and it was a mother, and I think she had a newborn baby, and then she had this adorable little girl who was about 18 months old. And I don't know what happened, but all of a sudden the mother very purposely marched away from her blanket about 10 feet away, and she had this little tiny plastic chair, and she put it down in the sand, and she picked up the little baby and put her in the chair and said, "You're in a timeout." Well, this little baby wailed. Like, you can't imagine the sobbing. And then after the sobbing, she became angry and she screamed and she made her body like a piece of wood and screamed in that chair. Everyone around us was looking. And then she stopped, completely silent, and went like this and looked at her mother to see if she was paying attention. And the mother said, "You're still in a timeout." And then it happened again. And it went on for about 6 minutes. So Ellis and I were a witness to this. And we were, at first I felt bad for the little baby. I thought, what could that, she had like a little ruffled bathing suit on. I said, what could that little tiny person have done to make her mother put her in a timeout at the beach? But then we kind of saw that it was funny in a way, and you know, the mother had to do what she needed to do. But the thing that this reminded me of was that we were witnesses to this. We didn't have any skin in the game. We weren't attached. We weren't in the drama. And it really was a drama for the mother and the little baby. They were in this big emotional play, Leela, you know, but we were just watching it from afar. And that made me think about this concept of the witness consciousness, that when we're in the spiritual eye, when we take our awareness from the medulla and bring it through to the spiritual eye, we can live more fully in the witness consciousness. So when we have our own dramas, because we all have our own dramas with our loved ones, our co-workers, our family, our friends, whatever it is, instead of getting caught in it and really getting pulled in, we can maybe rise above it and see it with sort of open curiosity and non-attachment. And when we can do that, it makes us more loving and more kind and more forgiving and less likely to pull ourselves into it and create more drama. So Lahiri Mahashaya counseled his devotees, his direct disciples, before they brought their awareness to the Christ Center, he actually told them to bring their awareness to the medulla when you start your meditation, and then visualize looking through the brain out through the forehead. So I've been playing around with that, and it does have a very powerful quality by just starting the meditation with the awareness in the medulla and then very consciously bringing it up through to the Christ Center, or again, the witness consciousness, or the consciousness where we could possibly taste a little bit of super conscious awareness. So back to the little baby. When this was going on, my first instinct was to run over and pick her up and give her a hug, you know, because I just, again, couldn't imagine how this little tiny person could have done anything to make her sort of be in this situation of a little bit of humiliation at the beach. But then I looked at the mom, and the mom had a newborn baby, and I remembered being in her footsteps. I never had two babies at once, but I do remember that feeling of being really exhausted and really frustrated and having this other little willful soul that just wanted her own way and having to give her a timeout. So I did feel that moment of compassion for both of them. And that reminds us that that's how God and the gurus watch our whole life. They watch as the witness, and they look at all of our little dramas, all of our sadness, all of our joy, our failures, everything that we're going through in life, and they see it with unconditional love. Unconditional love and support for us. There's no judgment. And the other thing to remember, and this always gives me hope on the spiritual path, we talk about this all the time, that Yogananda, Jesus, Babaji Krishna, Buddha, each one of those self-realized masters have been through every single situation that we've been through. So at some point, many thousands of lifetimes ago, Yogananda and Jesus were mothers having to discipline a little child. And so if we apply that to our own life when we're going through a difficult time, and then we try to rise above it by, again, bringing the conscious awareness up to the Christ Center and sort of removing ourselves from the emotion and the desire attached to it, that we can then sort of learn to purify and release and move on. Yogananda said that desire was given not to be used for material things, but that our need for the infinite be satisfied. This is truly our heart's desire. So again, going into the heart center each day, knowing that we are all anointed as well. Again, Jesus is an honorific title of anointment by God, but each one of us is anointed by God too at the Christ Center when we come into the body. And God is there watching us, loving us, and cheering for us with non-judgment and complete love and compassion. And as Krishna said to Arjuna, let's work to annihilate all desire except our desire to know God.